So today I want to share some aspects of a work in progress, an article about two recent literary sequels to Mark Twain's The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, both of which are set in the American West. Phong Nguyen's The Adventures of Joe Harper from 2016 and Robert Coover's HUCK Out West from 2017. There have been numerous sequels to Twain's novels about Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. Some of them have literary ambition and a literary pedigree, and others are genre entertainments or self-published novels. All are worthy of critical reflection and exploration, but I became interested in Nguyen and Coover because their novels are so recent and because of how different their literary profiles are. Nguyen is a young and successful writer whose The Adventures of Joe Harper won the Prairie Heritage Book Award, while Coover is a postmodernist whose literary career spans more than half a century. I should say that I come to these novels not as a Twain scholar, but as a comparativist who is interested in tracking literary and popular culture representations of the American West. As such, my thinking has been shaped by a series of overlapping conversations in American studies about the importance of rethinking exceptionalist and nationalist interpretations of the American West. One of these conversations centered on the new Western history promoted by Patricia Nelson Limerick and other historians in the 1980s, while another was tied to the redefinition of the term borderlands in Gloria Anzaldua's Borderlands, the New Mestiza, La Frontera from 1987. Other more recent sites for unraveling myths of the American West are the interrelated concepts of the Postwestern, critical regionalism, and the so-called global West. And I'm not going to dwell on theoretical genealogies here, so I'll just say that, I can't believe I'm going to do this, but I'll just say that we could encapsulate such approaches through keywords like decentering, rhizome, fluidity, mobility, contingency, provisionality, and margins, all of which challenge monumentalist, nationalist, and exceptionalist dimensions of the myth of the American frontier. The end of the theoretical part of my paper. It's okay, it's not like this will be posted on YouTube or anything. I don't want to, and I look forward now to plugging in these two novels into, a fill-in-the-blanks matching, with all of these keywords. I hope you'll enjoy it. I won't indulge in a lot of plot summaries. What I want to do is pull out some big questions, some big themes, things that I think are relevant beyond these novels. It comes out of these novels and are directly relevant to my analysis, but which I think will speak to us on other levels as well. The first big conversation I want to allude to is the substitution of the word sequel with the word adaptation. And when I speak about these novels, I like to think about them as adaptations because as Linda Hutchin and Siobhan O'Flynn show in their excellent book on the subject, adaptations transcode or transpose original source material into a new frame and context, reinterpreting and recreating stories through an intertextual process that evokes the memory of its source material. Adaptations involve, quote, an interpretive doubling, a conceptual flipping back and forth between the work we know and the work we are experiencing, end of quote. Because Nguyen and Coover's novels involve stylistic attempts to recreate the voice and characters of iconic classics and revise their aims and focus, it is more accurate to describe them as adaptations than as sequels. In the case of film or television, works adapted from literature are transformed and conventionally viewed as inferiorly realized through a series of assumptions about how literary and visual form constrain different kinds of effects, such as the superiority of writing for representing interior states and multiple temporalities, and the idea that visual storytelling is better at depicting exterior states and a present tense effect. I would argue that notions of value, and by the way, I'm just cribbing from from Linda Hutchin and Siobhan O'Flynn in what I just said. It's not me being really smart. I want to give them credit there. So notions of value are negotiated in novel-to-novel adaptations through arguments about aesthetic value or ideology. A pastiche, a combination of various ingredients that results in a text that is neither an original or a copy, has conventionally been considered flat and inert in comparison to freer literary reinventions like parodies, and to narrower and less devalued techniques like collage or palimpsest, which emphasize the transformative effects of layering or superimposition. In this regard, pastiches are not unlike formulaic fictions that extend pleasure through sameness. However, literary adaptations that deliberately diverge from their original source material in some way can acquire popular and critical prestige. In Minor Characters, in a book called Minor Characters Have Their Day, Genre and the Contemporary Literary Marketplace, Jeremy Rosen shows how, thanks to postmodernism, the culture wars, and the success of Wide Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys, novelists began to pluck minor characters out of their so-called minor status to stage critiques of oppression and outdated definitions of identity. Rosen highlights examples like the ones on this slide, and we could add several examples related to Mark Twain, such as Jon Clinch's Finn, Nancy Rawles' My Jim, Nguyen's Adventures of Joe Harper. The case of Robert Coover's Huck Out West is a little bit different, since it is not predicated on a minor character, and because it rejects contemporary identity politics. I'm not going to delve into this, but I just want to throw this out here because I think it's a natural extension of what I'm talking about. I think it would be interesting to look at the potential applicability of these ideas to Mark Twain's novels. For example, to think about The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn as a minor character adaptation that in some ways seeks to correct the juvenilia of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. And there are people in this room who are much more experienced in Twain studies than I am, who might be able to, talk about this in an informed way and validate that or not. So that's one theme that I'm kind of tackling in my research. The other theme that I want to share today relates to how Nguyen and Coover's novels use inset stories to challenge the mythical discourse of. I still have 5 more minutes. I'm interested in inset stories and how they challenge mythical discourse that we associate with the American West. So I want to begin by saying that both novels use the mythical West and embody the mythical West in the character of Tom Sawyer, who is represented as basically a monstrous killer, as a butcher. And I don't use the words butcher and butchery lightly in characterizing their representation of Mark Twain, not Mark Twain. He is not represented as a serial killer or a butcher in these novels. I just want to make sure that you don't buy the books looking for that. It's not in it. But Tom Sawyer, however, you'll be pleased to know, is a maniacal killer in both of these novels. Now, Coover in particular leans into Tom's playfulness to represent the grown-up character as a psychotic author figure, as a creator, who is intent on wounding and severing bodies in terms of making his fantasies come true. Nguyen also represents Tom as a racist and as a killer and as a fantasist. Coover describes Tom in a way that's similar to the photograph we have up on screen: white kid gloves, red bandana, shiny boots. And Coover pairs this matinee idol or cartoon cowboy costume with Tom as a gleeful aficionado of lynching. And Nguyen describes, how Tom Sawyer is able to murder people with his saber in their sleep, covering their mouths and going from person to person and massacring, a band of outlaws. So what's going on here is that these authors are essentially relitigating the ending of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn and the debates about Tom Sawyer's intervention at the end of that novel. Both of these characters are faced with a Tom Sawyer who's trying to push them away from doing the right thing and who's leading them towards a darker place. And all of this is a restaging of readers' opinions, but also critical debates about the ending of Huckleberry Finn. I know there are so many quotes we could pull to talk about the controversies over the adventures over the ending of Huckleberry Finn. I really like what E.L. Doctorow wrote about it once, even though he's not an academic. Are we allowed to talk about writers who are not academics? E.L. Doctorow once wrote, echoing, many people, including, Leo Marx, Tom's book and Huck's book are conflicting visions of the same past, and at the end of Huckleberry Finn, one vision prevails, and it is the wrong one. That's the quote that I like to put E.L. Doctorow in everything that I do. It makes me feel good. But I think that these novels are, their construction of the character of Tom Sawyer flows very naturally out of the ending of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. So in closing, I just want to talk about the issue of inset stories. In both novels, we have characters. In the case of Joe Harper, we have hobos who are telling stories because it's very much a hobo migration westward motion novel. And in the case of Robert Coover, the character Huck himself allies himself with a Lakota young man who is a trickster figure, and there are a lot of trickster tales that are told in Huck Out West. And these inset stories are essentially deconstruct mythical visions of the American West and critique racism and dehumanization and oppression. And that's where I'm going with the article. I've got 28 seconds, which I want to use by saying that...
You can add 2 minutes, okay? Because we talked before. Go ahead.
Okay, all right. So I'm very interested in this idea of the trickster figure. I'm just kind of throwing a bunch of things at you that are in this paper I'm working on. My alternative was to give you an endless plot summaries of both of these novels. So I hope I haven't disappointed you too much with that. But I'm interested in the trickster, literary tricksters, and I really like Barbara Babcock Abrams' definition of the trickster as a figure that embodies ambiguity and paradox. What do you think about this guy as a visual representation of a trickster? I was excited about that. Embodies ambiguity and paradox. The trickster is a figure... See, that's my phone going off. Okay. What a disaster. Oh my goodness. The trickster, she writes, embodies ambiguity and paradox. He confuses all customary categories. And so the embedding of stories that are very playful, very ludic, in the case of Coover, postmodern, really just kind of jumbles up the myth of the American West. And this is how my paper engages with the so-called post-Western critical tradition, which is popular among some literary and cultural studies scholars, kind of applying post-structuralist principles and concepts and lenses to the study of representations of the American West. Thank you very much for your attention. And I didn't say this at the beginning, but I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I want to thank the organizers for inviting me, Joe, the Joes, and I'd like to thank Ben, who unfortunately can't be here, and thank you everyone for making me feel welcome.